When it comes to settling the Canadian West, images such as John Wayne on his way to settle matters with a group of reckless outlaws, or Robert Duvall chasing down a herd of buffalo may come to mind, but probably not images of black cowboys, such as John Ware, a former slave. The truth is, however, that many black settlers and former slaves came to Canada to gain a fresh start and to help settle the West after slavery was abolished as a result of the American Civil War in 1865. We rarely hear or learn about these narratives, nor the story of Indigenous people that were already settled on the land, due to the dominant single-story narrative of European settlers. John Ware's character and spirit set him apart as an important figure in early Canada, though an often unheard of one. It is unclear exactly where John started his life. Most historical accounts are written by his friends and acquaintances after his death, and he could not read or write himself to leave a record. However, his marriage registration from 1892 lists Tennessee as his home state. Alternatively, though, many accounts, including Grant McEwen's biographical narrative John Ware's Cow Country, suggest South Carolina as his birthplace. Despite the debate, all accounts are in alignment that John Ware was a slave who was born in the early part of the 19th century in one of the southern states. John's daughter Nettie provides the most authentic testimony of her father's early life, noting Texas to be his only known origin, and how fact and fiction seem to be intermingled with his whole life story. After the abolition of slavery, John worked as a cowboy in Fort Worth, Texas, the hub of the cattle industry at the time. It was likely in Texas that John learned the ranching and horsemanship skills necessary to take on the Canadian frontier. In the 18th and 19th century, rinderpest virus, also known as cattle plague, decimated cattle populations in Britain, forcing the livestock industry elsewhere. Western Canada's wide-open grasslands were the perfect place for this growth, which brought many settlers to Canada looking for financial opportunities, including John Ware. John arrived in what would soon become Alberta, Canada in late September 1882 on the first major cattle drive from Texas. The 3,000 cattle delivered from this trip are what is the foundation of the ranching industry in Canada today. Many herds' bloodlines can still be traced back to this original herd. John was hired onto the cattle driving team by his friend Bill Moody. Reportedly, the stockman Tom Lynch hired Moody as the foreman of the drive, but Moody only accepted under the condition that his friend John Ware be hired as well. The story goes that John was given the worst horse, the worst saddle, and the worst jobs, yet still proved himself to be the best cowboy on the team. So much so that when the team arrived at the Bayou Ranch near what would soon become Calgary, Alberta, the owner of the cattle, Fred Stimson, offered John a job, which he accepted. John worked as a hired hand on a number of ranches, including the Coron and High River Horse Ranch, before moving on to start his own operation. Though evidence of John's early life is obscure at best, evidence of his ranching success is clear. In 1888, he bought his first ranch on the banks of Sheep Creek, Alberta, and ran 200 head of cattle there. In 1900, when the CPR began to bring more and more settlers to the area, John moved his ranch and family to Dutchess, Alberta, to avoid the competition. He originally took the brand of the 4 Nines, but later changed it to 3 Nines, probably for quicker branding of the cattle. He was a pioneer of irrigation systems as well, that were used to grow hay to feed his animals during the long, cold Canadian winters. Slim Marsden, a ranching peer of John, commented on John's abilities and character. There are so many enthusiastic stories of his prowess in the saddle, of his great personal courage in difficult places. His deeds would warrant a hero shrine in any Hall of Fame nowadays. John also proved himself to be a talented rodeo cowboy. In June of 1893, he won first place in the Calgary Exhibition, a precursor to the Calgary Stampede, in steer roping, where he roped and tied down a steer in 53 seconds, earning himself a saddle worth $75. During this time, John also married and had 6 children. On March 2, 1892, John married Mildred Jane Lewis, who was from an influential black family with roots in Toronto, and had moved to Alberta in 1889. Together they had 2 girls and 4 boys: Janet, Bob, the twins, Willie and Mildred, and Arthur and Daniel. Together they worked hard to nurture their family and raise their cattle. These were happy times for the Ware family. Life on the Canadian frontier wasn't always easy for John, despite the high regard most of his peers seemed to have for him, and success he found. He faced racism of all kinds, from all different fronts of society. Even though John was typically well received as a cowboy amongst his peers, society at large still had racist ideologies. This was reflected in the Edmonton Board of Trade demanding a head tax of $1,000 for each person of African descent that migrated to Canada in 1911, in an attempt to end black migration. There was also many local attacks of racism that John faced. In McEwen's John Ware's Cow Country, he accounts a tale of John being refused a hotel room in Medicine Hat, Alberta, on account of John being a colored man. The issue was resolved when John's friends stepped in to reason with the man who refused John the room with less than tactful etiquette. But nonetheless, John ended up with a hotel room. Even local tributes to John that seemed like an attempt to honor him were lost in racist slurs that John's children had to fight valiantly to put an end to these so-called tributes. On top of these racial injustices, the Wares also faced challenges characteristic of the ranching industry. There was always unpredictable weather patterns that dictated their annual success. In one unusually wet spring, the Wares unfortunately lost their home in Dutchess when the creek overflowed. They also faced extreme isolation, which became particularly dangerous in medical emergencies. During the birth of the twins, Willie was stillborn, and without the ability to call a doctor or midwife, John had to breathe life into the newborn baby's lungs. In 1905, Mildred died of pneumonia, and John followed a year later when his horse fell into a badger hole and crushed him. Their children were sent to live with Mildred's parents, Daniel and Charlotte Lewis. It is often said that the spirit of a country can be found in its people. John Ware is a shining example of the brightest parts of Canada, and helps to reveal some very dark aspects as well. John Ware the Man and the Cowboy is beautifully summarized in the Fort Macleod Gazette on June 23, 1885, after helping out on a cattle roundup. John is not only one of the best-natured and most obliging fellows in the country, but he is one of the shrewdest cowmen, and the man is considered pretty lucky who has him to look after his interest. The horse is not running on the prairie, which John cannot ride.